Clonell. And I am the Director of Historic Preservation at the Lower Merion Conservancy. And I am delighted that you're all able to join us here for this event tonight, which is titled Philadelphia's 50,000 Watt Modernism, WCAU and Modern Design at the Broadcast Frontier. First, our very sincere thanks to St. Joe's University for sharing their Zoom account to host this event, and a special thanks to Mike McCann, Professor and Chair of the Biology Department at St. Joseph's University. I'd also like to thank our sponsor for this evening, Archer & Buchanan. Archer & Buchanan is a full-service architectural firm celebrating its 25th year this year. They have been a longtime and generous supporter of the Conservancy, and we're grateful for their assistance in making this programming available tonight. So thank you, Archer & Buchanan. Many of you are Conservancy members, so you know about our work in the community. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, however, the Conservancy is a member-supported nonprofit that works to protect the watershed, open space, and the historic character of Lower Merion and Narberth. And like Archer & Buchanan, we are also celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. So if you enjoy programs like this, please consider donating to help us through the next 25 years. As the title suggests, this lecture will put the spotlight on Lower Merion Township's WCAU building, one of the region's most important mid-century commissions. The Conservancy has had a long-standing interest in the building, which sits at the corner of Monument Avenue and City Avenue in Bala Cynwyd, designed by one of the country's most notable mid-century architects. In recent years, our interest in the building has turned to concern because the building, which is owned by Comcast, was vacated in 2018 and is now without a long-term use. The building does not have any preservation protections, so it's vulnerable to neglect, to insensitive development, and to demolition. So I'd like to bring you to the highlight of the evening, which is our speaker, William Whitaker. Bill is a curator, or the curator and collections manager of the Architectural Archives at the University of Pennsylvania's Weitzman School of Design. He was trained as an architect and an architectural historian at the University of New Mexico and the University of Pennsylvania, respectively. At the archives, Bill works on documenting and interpreting Penn's design collections. And in his work, he has also organized and co-curated over 30 exhibitions. And I know that many of you likely know Bill's work, and especially through his research and writing on the architect Louis Kahn. The Conservancy is honored to host Bill as the speaker this evening. As you'll see, he has a wealth of knowledge about the WCAU building and its place in the history of radio and television broadcasting. He's also been an advocate for the preservation of the WCAU building. You can read an excellent piece he wrote about the building in the Conservancy's most recent watch list publication, which is our annual publication highlighting vulnerable and at-risk properties in Lower Merion and in Narberth, and that's on our website. So we will be recording tonight's presentation. If you don't wish to be seen, please turn off your camera. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box. I'll be able to share them with Bill, and he'll be able to answer them at the end of the lecture. So without further delay, I will pass the screen over to Bill. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Kathleen, for that wonderful introduction. I'm really pleased to be here tonight. And I've found over the past year or so in looking more expansively about the modernism in the Philadelphia region, just what a special place Philadelphia has in the kind of development of technology, of industry, of so many things. We know this about Philadelphia, but to see it represented in a series of buildings tied to broadcasting, tied to, technology and computer development in this region, from the 30s to the 70s is really quite inspiring and gets me beyond my continuing and always interest in Louis Kahn. So just before I go on, just a quick thank you. There were so many people who were helpful in putting this talk together, which is, covers a lot of ground, but Christian Bush, David Brownlee, Sandy Eisenstadt, and Frank Matero all were helpful in providing the information of how to shape this talk. Jeff Cohen, is someone who's been around for a long time and, actually met Harry Sternfeld, who's someone I'm going to talk about. And as, of course, Susan Baruco and her students at Jefferson, who are trying to wrestle with, positive futures for the WCAU building. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things. I'm going to cover a lot of territory that, provides a deep and rich context and for the WCAU building in Lower Merion. And it's really, its significance is tied to that context. In broadcasting, in architectural design, in so many ways. So it's ambitious. I've got a lot of ground to cover. It's almost an impossible task, but I'll stay pretty close to architecture and design. And I'm sure that there's people who know, who are with us tonight, who know much more about the specifics of the technology and things like that. That's not really my forte. But it's still really exciting nonetheless to see that incorporated into architecture and the networks around clients and people who are involved in the production of these projects. So let me share my screen. Okay. So, we're going to talk about CAU, but it's going to take a little while to get there, so bear with me. So I couldn't resist beginning with a blank slide, starting off with the obvious point that sound itself attracts, and that in talking about WCAU, you're really beginning with radio, and radio is really about listening and hearing. And so the idea that there's a visual component to what's going on is really, in some ways, not a part of radio. And that the sound that comes through and is projected out into the world is really offered profoundly different ways of people to, Americans to know the world around them. It taught them new ways to think, to talk, to, participate in the world around them. And it brought those ideas to their living rooms, right? And that this was a profound way of changing our world. And this is really happening in the years after World War I. First radio stations coming online in the early 20s, and really this onrush that happens in the late 20s that starts to, transform the world around us. But it's that idea of broadcasting, and that, one person can talk to millions of people. This mass media idea, mass broadcasting idea, and that radio could become a utility that everyone has in their household. Of course, that comes true. And in some ways, we're talking extensively about David Sarnoff and Radio Corporation of America, but there's many other people involved. By the time World War II ends, peace finds the world at the brink of television. And so many were surprised by how quickly that, golden age of radio kind of, ends and television begins. So by 1954, 55, people really are not talking about radio, and the old programs have either migrated to television or they're gone, right? And so that era of the golden age of radio is really quite short. It's about 15 years, and it cuts off by the release of television. So WCAU, in being established in 1928, being an important early, part of the CBS network. It's the second affiliate outside of New York. It's the first affiliate, the second station, and also being at the cutting edge of technology in terms of radio and television is really, an incredibly important part of the story. So is Philadelphia, and the idea that we're manufacturing things, radio sets, and later television sets is important. So just seeing the Atwater Kent brochure from the early about 1924 here, and their purpose-built plant on Wissahickon Avenue in Philadelphia. Seeing the setting of that plant, and it's filled with women, just thinking about the place of women in the modern, world and in modern America. You look at the photographs in the Library of Congress, and it's filled with women, which is really interesting. This idea that, in that period where there's this great expansion, Americans are spending a third of the money they spend on their home furnishings on radio receivers. So in one way, where radio is really, it's an invisible thing, it's coming to us through the air. For most Americans, it shows up in the context of their home in a piece of furniture. And so millions of people are owning radio sets by the late 20s. They're spending a great deal of fortune on buying those sets. But it's that idea of broadcasting and, one person talking to millions, and that this is going into the home, right? So RCA and other corporations making radios, producing equipment for radios, are really recognizing that it's radio into the home, right? And so this is a huge thing that pushes radio and broadcasting, and still to this day, has an effect on this world. So besides Atwater Kent, which based in Philadelphia, we also have RCA and RCA Victor in particular, and their facilities over in Camden. A huge amount of material related to radio generally is produced just across the river over in Jersey. And of course, RCA has facilities throughout the United States, but their research and technology, I think, is really based in the Camden area, and much of their production based just across the way. Philco is another one in this area. This is in North Philadelphia, an early producer. And between Atwater Kent, who was the major producer in the 20s, Philco is really the largest producer, in the late 20s, 30s, and onwards. And all of these companies, RCA, Philco, Atwater Kent, are producing televisions by the 1940s and 50s. Of course, there's others like Zenith out in Illinois and elsewhere, but there's a huge context here in Philadelphia that's part of the WCAU story. But just looking at the radio set itself, this is from Philco's 1926 catalog. It's a piece of furniture, but you see an interesting color and decorative elements. By 1936, you can see modern, you can see what we might call Art Deco. So the taste of Americans is being shaped by radio. The kind of furniture they bring in, their awareness of the world, is being changed by the image of radio as an element into the future. Of course, Philco has their factory, and Atwater Kent, RCA, and Philco all are part of the built heritage that remains in this region related to the manufacture of radio and television. This is on Tioga in North Philly. Philco is also really interesting because they're among the early experimenters in television. They actually had an experimental station as early as 1928 for television, projecting into about 100 homes of Philco employees as a way of testing television. They would broadcast movies, in other words. And so this is something that starts to develop the television context. Here at the University of Pennsylvania, you also have the electrical engineering program. And here is a wonderful drawing by Paul Cray's office that shows radio antennas on top of the alterations that his firm is making to the Moore School in 1925-26. Those were not built, but it tells you that everybody is wanting to get into the game when it comes to this most vital of technologies, in radio and its potential for the future. And also what comes out of that, especially at Penn and elsewhere, is the linkage to modern computing. We know ENIAC was made and built in the Moore School building, but that leads to modern computing. And so you get Remington Rand buying out and buying that technology of ENIAC, and that leads us to the Remington Rand building on Locust near Rittenhouse Square. That may be the first showroom for computers in America, a building of 1948. The Univac Center out in Bluebell, which is, this is kind of before, Silicon Valley, or Silicon Valley's just getting set up. Vincent Kling doing a series of buildings for RCA, their technology center over in Cherry Hill, which is sadly demolished. I.M. Pei was a design consultant for that. And then Vincent Kling, the electronic tube division factory, which still exists out near Lancaster, that's where most of the picture tubes for color televisions in America were made. And it was also one of the first major applications of clean rooms in American industrial centers outside of the defense industry. And you also have the General Electric Space Technology Center out in Valley Forge. This is all part of the context. And I think if we're talking about media, we can also go backwards, and I won't go very far tonight, just to remind you of Ladies Home Journal, the Curtis Publishing Building, NWA Advertising. This is all part of Philadelphia's place in this larger media context of the 20th century, late 19th century. And that's part of the context for CAU. So on the left, we see an amateur radio station. This is one of the first to broadcast in the early 20s. It really shows how amateur, that this was something that people got excited about, enthusiastic about, and they rigged it together. But CAU on Chestnut Street built the first purpose-built radio station in the United States. And so I will focus first on that building, completed in December 1932, which we see on the right. Okay. So let me introduce quickly a cast of characters that will play a part of both buildings. In particular, I'll point out the Levy brothers, Leon and Ike. And they are the founders of CAU. Ike in particular, he buys the station in 1922. His brother joins him several years later. They become part of the early CBS network. They're the second affiliate of the CBS network. And it's Leon's brother-in-law, William Paley, who is the force behind CBS nationally, and for decades, I think 40 or 50 years. So there are very close ties between CAU and the emergence of CBS specifically. The Levy brothers are major stockholders along with the Paleys and others, and have a controlling interest in CBS, again, for decades. So what goes on nationally is reflected in the knowledge of what to do here in Philadelphia in terms of built work, technology, and so on. John Leach is an engineer, an electrical engineer, who is the designer and planner of both the stations, the WCAU radio station on Chestnut Street and CAU on City Avenue. And so he's this connective tissue. He's aware of TV as he's designing the radio station in 1931, but it's just a dream in a sense, but they know this is something that's coming. He's responsible for alterations to the radio station in the 40s to make room for television, and ultimately lays out the schematics for what to do with the City Line building. There's a series of designers specific to the first building on Chestnut Street. Gabriel Roth, later a partner of Elizabeth Fleischer. Here's the Parkway building. I don't have a portrait of him. Harry Sternfeld, who is really the design architect. There's Robert Heller, a really important interior designer and industrial designer in America, in league with Raymond Loewy, Donald Desky, and others. And then John Vezos, who's an artist who does murals, but he also becomes the in-house designer of radios and televisions for RCA a few years after he does the murals in the CAU building. But let me focus on Harry Sternfeld for a moment. He is one of the most elite, highly regarded architects in the United States. He's trained here at Penn. He's a winner of the Paris Prize in 1914. Of course, World War I occurs, so he winds up doing his time in Paris and in Europe right after World War I. This is his Paris Prize competition from 1914. But Sternfeld is someone who is engaged with the Beaux-Arts, but he's also thinking about the modern world. Here's a sampling of his works from a competition entry for the Appomattox Courthouse to the Slovak Girls Academy to the Sunderman House, which is one of the most interesting kind of early Art Deco houses in Philadelphia, to the Morris House out in Flowertown, and the post office in 8th and Market. These are all major works, and Sternfeld being one of our most highly regarded architects. He's the one responsible for the design of the exterior of the building. There's a lot that goes on inside, and I'm going to take you to the inside in a moment. But this is the building as it was built, as you'd see it at 1622 Chestnut Street in the early 1930s. And you can see there's a Woolworths, so there's retail on the bottom floor. And so we can see this in a contemporary photograph. And then here is a section through the building, so a vertical slice through the building. And I just want to show you that there's rental on the ground floor. There's office spaces on these the second and third floor. There's rental on the fourth, but then CAU is really occupying the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th floors. There's office spaces sandwiching the production facilities, so the studio facilities. So on the 5th floor, I've got a lot of imagery of the 6th and 7th floor, nothing of the 5th floor, but we know that there was an experimental laboratory for the transmission of music that Leopold Stokowski was participating in. And so the broadcasting of music is really important. This was an area where you could explore that, right? Which is interesting. The 4th floor winds up being the first home of KYW, which was established as a station in Chicago. It comes to Philadelphia in 1934, and KYW is actually owned by Dr. Leon Levy and his brother. So they own both the major TV stations, and KYW was the NBC Westinghouse affiliate. So Leon Levy and his brother actually have rivals under the same roof. And then Leach, the engineer, designs the outfitting for KYW. So a few years later, KYW gets its own studio. And so here on the left is a rendering of that. It's almost exactly the same when you start to think about it and look at it. The KYW studio to the CAU studio, which tells you that what they did on Chestnut Street was cutting edge, and it worked. And a few years later, they drew from that example and repeated it the next block over. Here we can see vertically the windows where there's office spaces, but the top spaces which are blanked out where you have some of the production facilities. And then here's a section through KYW where ultimately the Philco channel, the television station, which has its first home on the top of this building. So Leach, in building out television and anticipating the installation of television, provided spaces in both buildings. So let me walk us through the images that I've assembled of the interiors of the building. And so this is where I think we might move away from Sternfeld's hand. I'm going to come back to that, and we're going to explore the interiors of the building. So let's start with Dr. Levy's office and getting to Dr. Levy's office. So when you entered the lobby, there was some elegant doors on the elevator. I think these might actually have been designed by Sternfeld, but you entered the elevator and you went up to the 8th floor. So coming out, you would have been in this reception area. And then entering Leon Levy's office, you can see there's an elegant use of veneers. You can see there's a horizontal quality to the detailing of the walls that will be repeated in the studio areas. The use of teak and other elegant materials. I think we saw that on some of the radio sets. So there's this dialogue between what's actually physically brought into people's homes and then what, the imagery that's within the building itself or the materials chosen. But here I want to take you back to that slide where I just spoke to a black, a black image into a void. On center with Dr. Levy's desk was a radio set, right? He did not need to be in the studios where the productions were happening. It's really about what you hear and the effectiveness of it to your ear. So the place of the radio and as it was deployed throughout the building is an interesting thing that we should pay attention to. So here's a plan of the 6th floor. And I want us to look just quickly at the audition room before we start to explore the studio spaces. So at the center of what was known as the client's audition room is another one of those radio sets. And we see that right here. And the wood around is beautiful rosewood. We turn around, we can see there's cork integrated into the walls for sound absorption. And that there's an atmosphere here that's quite elegant, but it's meant to give a space that provides the people who are actually sponsoring the radio shows a place where they can test the effectiveness of the product, either in a rehearsal or as an actual broadcast, right? It's not about what you see, it's about what you hear, right? That's interesting, and that's a difference, right? But they are making room in this building for people to come in and visit and to actually, see what's going on. So I'm going to take you through the 6th floor and 7th floor because there's quite good images of what these spaces look like. And I'll just point out the light blue are spaces where the public could come in and actually see what was going on. These green spaces are the studio spaces where they're producing things. So Studio A, Studio B, C, and D. And then the purple color are where the control rooms are. The utility spaces are closets, and you don't have to worry about things like sets, and other things that are part of things that have to do with the visual world of television, theater, and other things. So here's Studio A, which was the biggest of the studio. And the colors are described, but we don't have color imagery: French gray, blues, chromium colors. The horizontal stripes that you see are actually incorporating sound absorption technology in the way of metal panels with perforation that had sound absorption materials on the other side. And here's the control room for Studio A. Let's go to Studio B. So those perforated plates then are serving an important aspect to the performance of the space. This is where technology, the engineering is taking place or is playing an important role. So this is the live end of the studio where you have the performers, you've got doors into the storage area, the doors, which were really a vestibule that provided sound, absorption spaces so that each studio had its own vestibule. Here's the visitor gallery here. Here's the visitor gallery upstairs. It's funny, it's a narrow space. The chairs are on the other side. So while you can look in, it's not activated in the space of making it really easy to look. Again, it's about what you hear, not about what you see, right? But the atmosphere, the design, the elegance of the interior design is really meant for the performers to bring out in them kind of a power of a performance to inspire them. And so here we're looking where the microphones are, and this was known as the dead end of the studio, the space that actually had the most absorption. And you had, besides the metal panels, you had fabrics that were deployed to provide sound absorption and control. This was high technology, and this was one of the first places to really demonstrate that technology in a kind of comprehensive way as a major investment, right? So in Studio C, which is one of the smaller studios, you can see the first of 3 murals by John Vezos. And this is the great God radio. And you can see God coming down and touching the world, very much in the spirit of Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, where, God touches man. But in this way, it kind of takes the form of a tube, of a filament, right? So he's telling a narrative of the place of radio in culture. And that's the dead end. And here's the live end, where you have the performers in the control room. But again, this is a place where visitors can watch what's going on in a very controlled setting. So let's look at Studio D, another one of the spaces where Vezos did a mural. This is the spirit of radio. And you can see this is one of the electronic devices that is producing the signal. I forget what this is called, forgive me. But the colors of the interior, in terms of the fabric, it's imported fabric. There's special shades of sand and salmon on the wall coloring. These are really, to my eye, incredibly elegant spaces. And one can begin to imagine what it was like to step into them and perform, right? This is something that I think elevates the experience of the people within the space. And so here we can see the singer Kate Smith, one of the great singers of her day. You just think God Bless America as an old recording, and it's her. Within this space, you can get a sense of the size and scale of those spaces. So then up on the 7th floor, you've got a series of other spaces. Studio A and B were 2-story double height spaces. They were about 28 feet tall. And so on the 8th floor were the visitor galleries that overlooked Studio A and Studio B. There were also windows there that provided you views out into the city and some daylight, and a visitor's reception room, which we'll see in a moment. On the 7th floor were Studio F, J, and then some of the specialized studios related to the master control room, Studio G and Studio H. I actually have Studio H in the wrong place. It's actually right here. This was a little office space, so this drawing actually needs to be corrected. The master control room brings together all the control rooms from the individual studios and is what's sending the signal out to the transmitter, which was located about 15 miles away. Okay, so here's the visitor reception room. And so we can see the walls are combining black, Chinese red, and putty color. Very elegant furniture, tubular metal furniture. In the corner, so if we went around the corner here, is a wonderful little telephone booth, a pair of them, which must have been really fun. So Studio F, in gray, salmon, and blue color palette. Studio G was the standby studio. This is where one would do an emergency broadcast if there was an event that happened. And of course, events like Pearl Harbor, and other events like that. This is where you would break in and somebody could step into this room and make an announcement directly. Studio H was where they did what was known as transcription, which is actually the recording of performances onto record discs, vinyl discs that then could be distributed out to other stations for later rebroadcasting, right? And so this was very new technology at the time. Integrating this into the studios with the RCA Victor turntables was something new and important about this. But maybe the most beautiful studio was Studio J, and Vezos's mural Radio Tempo was like the key feature in this space. The room has deep blue colors, blacks and chromium. The mural itself was black, white, and gray. Here are some performers in that space to give you a sense of scale. This seems pretty majestic to me. And so here in the corner, we see the architects and engineers planning the building. We see it taking its place in the Philadelphia skyline. We see a singer performing. We also see industry, rail, automobiles, industry, trains, other parts of the industrial world and radio taking its place within that. And then this larger context of the world around, from ships to flying machines and so on. So really trying to capture the spirit of the age. Here's master control. This is where it all comes together. They're cueing the different performances, bringing them together with call signs and other things, and then sending it out to the transmission facility. Okay, that's all on the 7th floor. So here we see the position of the studio at 1622 Chestnut. 15 miles away to the west in Newtown Square was the transmitter building. That was opened a few months before the station building downtown. And so this is also designed by Gabriel Roth and Harry Sternfeld. And inside was the power room where they're creating the 50,000 watts for the transmission. Upstairs, you had the control rooms and the transmitting room for the productions, and then the antenna, which was 500 feet tall, and of course, you had to light that up. Okay, and so here are the kind of different component parts. Okay, so let's come back to the building and its setting and just talk briefly about the architecture again. On the left, we see the rendering that Sternfeld and Roth made, and we see this incredible vertical element integrating within the facade. Remember, these are rental areas, and the upper floors is really where radio production is occurring. And then this mast element that extended from here to here about 150 feet, really defining this as a building of that's something new, of the modern world. And you can see the elements of the facade start to define that character. So let's explore them a little bit, right? So the mast building, and I have to thank Christian Busch for this. He, for years, was kind of taking care of the building and stewarding it. So within that element, the tower, we see on the inside, it's quite elegant on the outside, and it's a fairly straightforward operation of steel on the inside to provide structural support. Of course, that was also in the back places where you were providing the lighting, and it creates a special sort of atmosphere. It's said that you could see this from 25 miles away, okay? So what did that look like? And what impact might it have been in the Philadelphia region? Well, I don't have photographs, say, from an airplane or from a distance that tell us what that looked like. But here are some of the Dalian photo surveys from the, showing the city of Philadelphia in about 1932. We see the tower, but it's really surrounded by taller buildings. But you can see here the train tracks leading to Broad Street Station, Rittenhouse Square, and Suburban Station. So swinging around, I think you really probably saw this very clearly when you arrived in Philadelphia on the train, right? And so when we zoom in a little bit closer, this is very prominent from the arrival as you come in on train. Also from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and I'm sure there's other places, like Belmont Hill and elsewhere where you get enough elevation from the city to actually see something that is brilliantly illuminated. And so when we pull in closer, you can see the CAU tower here, potentially visible from the Art Museum and other places. But again, I would love it if someone out there in the universe has an image of this as seen from a distance at night. But just based on the amount of light that was there, it's something that could be seen 25 miles away. So moving closer to the building, of course, it was not something that was just seen at night, right? So it had a daylight quality. It was also thought to have this reflective quality. So the entrance itself with elements that are in gold and silver, with iconography related to transmission and radio broadcasting. These wonderful chevrons of stainless steel, a material that is reflective and captures a special light quality at different times of the day. There's a luminescence. This photograph I took, was right at, towards dusk, and it starts to animate the facade in a really wonderful way. We see that the facade is blue, but it's actually painted blue now. When it was built, the facade was stucco, but the stucco incorporated glass in small fragments, right? And so here's a close-up detail of that glass embedded in the facade. This is technology that was beginning to be patented in the late 1920s for incorporation of stucco. The patents online talk about this being something that someone could have on their house. But of course, this is about how light hits a facade and about its luminous quality, right? So I think that the architects are engaging with spectacle and how the building stands out from those around it in a special and distinctive way. I think I have to do more research to think about, other examples of the use of this technology and other applications. So that's something to be continued. Of course, there's other elements in the painting of the building in different colors of blue. I don't know if this darker, brighter blue was integrated into the stucco or not, but today it's represented as an element of distinction in the painted part of the facade. So let's think a little bit about, what's the context for this? Of course, places like Luna Park in Coney Island get to, around the turn of the 20th century. These are photographs from 1905, how entertainment and this imagery of electric lighting and how that draws people to the new, to the spectacle, is of course something that maybe is in the design, behind the design of CAU on Chestnut Street. Of course, theaters are as well, and this is a contemporary example in Paris, the Rex Theater, but it's designed by the American architect John Eberson, who did many of the theaters, the atmospheric movie houses throughout the United States. But this is completed in Paris in 1932, the same year as CAU. We see the integration of color and light, and here it's decorative glass. So it's incorporating glass into the facade as well as big signs into the facade. But coming back to Philadelphia, it's not just the question of theaters and entertainment. Here's the electric lighting of our great civic building, the City Hall, from photographs in the late 20s and early 30s. And of course, at the core of this is the Philadelphia Electric Company. And just this idea, if it isn't electric, it isn't modern, right? And so you see PECO putting great electric signs on their buildings. And so where are we seeing this sign from? From the Benjamin Franklin Bridge. And while the Benjamin Franklin Bridge was built to carry trains across, or trolleys more specifically, across the Delaware, by the time it was built, cars had taken over. So this is seeing these places at the speed of automobiles. And so Philadelphia, the electric city, of course, that's referring to Ben Franklin and to the electric, his experiment with the kites, right? Here's the station down in Chester. And this is, as it's not quite, we're above where the great train lines are down to Baltimore and Washington. So Philadelphia Electric Company, then a few years later, electricity is cheap in Chester, right? I think this is a way that PECO, in civic leaders and others, they have this electric world on their mind. Broadcasting is clearly part of that. And then in neighborhoods like Kensington and elsewhere, you had at the local level, the Philadelphia Electric Company energizing the facade of their local store And in here, they're offering showrooms for the latest in electronic appliances, right? Perhaps at some point they had radios in here. So one last note about this context. Of course, the Philadelphia Savings Fund Society building and its great sign on the top of the building in 12th and Market, nothing more modern. This idea of creating a sign that's readable, legible, and can communicate at distance and capture people's imagination is part of what's behind the design of CAU, both on Chestnut Street and later on City Avenue. So by the 1940s, CAU is readying itself for television, and I think they had it in mind, as reported by Leach, that they would be incorporating television from the get-go. And so you can see that 97% of Philadelphians owned radio sets in 1948, but in 48, there are 3 broadcasting stations, CAU, WFIL, and WPTZ. This is the Philco station, which had been broadcasting, with an experimental license since 1931. FIL, which goes on air just a few months before CAU, in a purpose-built facility out in West Philadelphia that they greatly expanded in 1952 because of American Bandstand. And then CAU, which was modifying their building on Chestnut Street. So there were 40,000 television receivers in 1948. They were adding 6,000 a month. And so again, by 1954, 55, that world really has been transformed. So CAU really is transforming the 6th and 7th floor and those big studios, Studio A and B, but they actually thought about building on the 9th floor a big 60 by 100 foot studio on the top floor, which they never did. And you can see that extra space up there could have been built over top for additional studio space. And then here's the section through the Studio A and B, and then what the studios looked like before as radio and then as television. You can see the viewing from the control booth, which was also a place where the sponsors could sit, was much more about the visual and being able to see in that space. There's also a glass partition there. This is very high technology, triple pane glass that is very highly specialized in its design for technical reasons, for soundproofing. Of course, clocks here and here are all about the timing and keeping the time in important ways. But you can see the studios were very crowded. They had to walk up and down between different floors. It really was too crowded as soon as it was built. So the television production facilities at 1622 Chestnut were really a stopgap measure. But the broadcasting was done from the top of the PSFS building, okay? And so let's step away from Philadelphia briefly and then think about the larger context of CBS. I mentioned the important context of the Levy brothers, Leon Levy's brother-in-law, Paley, and they're the major forces behind CBS at the national level. So we need to look at the national level to understand what's going on at CAU and to understand the context. So in Los Angeles, CBS is based in New York, and its headquarters were in New York. So they hire William Lescaz, who was one of the architects of the PSFS building, along with George Howe. We're going to talk more about George Howe in a moment. And Lescaz starts outfitting existing theater spaces for radio productions in New York for CBS. He's also asked to design on Park Avenue a headquarters building, which looks suspiciously like the Great Lever House on Park Avenue of the late 1940s by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. It's an unbuilt building, but it was an entry point for him into CBS. We can see a production facility in New York by the architects Fellheimer and Wagner, who are major Art Deco modern architects. This is a former Vanderbilt family guest house, I think on 56th Street in New York. You can see they've reclad the facade and included throughout the building a series of production facilities that include spaces for audiences. The CAU buildings on Chestnut Street really didn't have spaces for live audiences. That tells you how early it was and how innovative it was, but it was not quite anticipating the presence of studio audiences. The facilities in New York of 1938 and Lescaz's facility in Los Angeles, also of 36 to 38, are capturing those. They're facilities for local stations, as well as providing programming at the national level. CAU in Philadelphia was providing radio shows that were being broadcast across the United States as part of the CBS network. So Lescaz is designing a studio building as a machine for living, which is Le Corbusier's great phrase about a house. I think what they're really meaning to say, it's a machine for broadcasting. But you see in CBS already a sense of the value that design plays in broadcasting, both for the sense of the utility, the functionality, but also as inspiring spaces for performers, but also for spaces for interchange between the public in real-time experiences in live audiences, but also, in their corporate image. So here are some images of the CBS Columbia Square as it was known. And you can see that there's a combination of retail spaces along with the studio spaces and office spaces. We see that coming out of CAU as the early example, here refined in a more functionalist aesthetic by Lescaz. Just a block away was NBC's Radio City West from CBS's Columbia Square. These facilities both open up in 1938. Radio City West is designed by the Austin Company, and the Austin Company are really important designers of industrial and broadcasting facilities. In the 1960s and 70s, they're designing the manufacturing facility for Boeing for 747 jets, right? In the 30s, they're doing buildings like this for CBS. They are important designers that are part of this WCAU building on City Avenue, right? And so this is part of the context as well. On the interior, you can see this is NBC and Austin Company. They're also incorporating murals and imagery of radio's place in culture and society. But I like this view of the city street. This is Hollywood. This is it's not Hollywood Boulevard. It's the other one. I'm sorry, I've forgotten. Sorry, it doesn't say. But you can see that there's spaces for studio audiences to actually walk right into the performance spaces. So I think that's interesting, the visibility that the audience can be a part of it. Here's opening night a few months earlier for Columbia Square. The big studio performance, the studio theater space within Lescaz's design for CBS, Columbia Square. Some of the smaller scale production facilities within these wonderful color palettes of the interior grays, oranges, the clocks, really reduced down in an interesting way. The color palette seems similar to what I read about CAU on Chestnut Street. But here's Dick Thornburg's office in Columbia Square. Here's William Lescaz with Dick Thornburg, who was the vice president in charge of West Coast operations for CBS. He's the one who oversaw the building of the West Coast facility with Lescaz. And here's William Paley. So Thornburg is recruited to become the president of CAU in 1948. And so he takes his experience from the West Coast for CBS and brings it to the design of WCAU on City Line Avenue. Okay. So let's look at the City Avenue building. And then we're going to go back out to look at some of CVS at the national scale again. So here's the building we're talking about in rendering that was published in the late 1950, early 1951, projecting the design. We can see there's an incredible and interesting use of glass. This is a 220-foot window wall that turns the corner along City Avenue, which of course is the Golden Mile in Lower Merion. And there's a whole important development of modern architecture that occurs in the 1950s along the City Line Avenue. I'll say it now and I'll say it again. This is one of the first buildings that signals that that moment, that heritage in Lower Merion, and it's one of the last surviving examples of that along the City Avenue. I'm not talking a lot about that context, but I'm just noting it here. So let me give you the cast of characters. You've met Leon Levy and Ike Levy. You've met William Paley. These are really important figures in CBS, and they remain so instrumental in the transition, in the creation of the network, in its expansion across the United States, in the development of radio and its transition into television broadcasting. And that Paley and Levy are there into the 70s. Ike Levy sells his shares in the late 1950s. Robert Mclean, the great newspaper man of the Philadelphia Bulletin, his father founded the newspaper. Mclean took it over, and he really established it as the premier evening newspaper, not just in Philadelphia, but one of the most influential newspapers in the United States. He was an incredibly important figure in the Associated Press, and in establishing the wire services, which is another important innovation of broadcasting that is embodied in his heritage. The Bulletin building down across from City Hall was something that was built at the turn of the century by Edgar Sealer and others, but it's really the architect George Howe that fits it out, refits it in the late 1930s to be a modern news facility. I'll get to George Howe in a moment. I've mentioned Donald Thornburg as being the president of CAU. He was hired by Mclean and the Levy brothers. The Levy brothers stayed on after Mclean acquired CAU, brought it into the Bulletin companies, and so it stayed part of the Bulletin companies from 1948 to 1957 when the station was sold back to CBS. Of course, there was a change where the station went from CBS to NBC. That happens, I think, in the 1990s, which is confusing to everybody. But the heritage we're really talking about is CBS. We've mentioned John Leach, the engineer. He's really providing the continuity over time, and he's really at the cutting edge of the engineering of how you make a station function. How do you need it to perform technically and in terms of engineering? And then the Austin Company, which are really a design build firm. They have architects there, but Mclean and the board, which included the Levy, and others, they held in their contract with the Austin Company the right to hire an architect to participate in the design of the building, in a sense to create the way it interfaces with the public and the way it's seen by the external world. That's where George Howe and Robert Montgomery Brown come in. They really establish how the building looks from the outside. They also brought important elements to the interior, to the furnishings, in the way that we saw CAU on Chestnut Street incorporating exciting interior design, industrial design to bring artists like John Bezos in. Well, there was an analog of that. And in that way, they brought a woman in, Anne Tritick Dickey, who was an important curator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She was part of the curatorial team with Elliot Noyes and Peter Blake that did Organic Design and Home Furnishings exhibition of 1941. That's the first time Charles Eames, Eero Saarinen, and a whole host of other designers that come to define mid-century modern in the United States in terms of design. I'm talking furniture and so on, but also fabrics, textiles, and so on. And Dickey is is one of the key curators involved in that. She also, after World War II, winds up working for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill and is outfitting the United Nations building. She's choosing fabrics, textiles, and furniture in the Secretariat and elsewhere through the building. And she's hired by George Howe to do that with the CAU building, right? So we also, with the bulletin, Mclean is hiring Howe and Brown not just to design the CAU building. He had hired, Howe to re-outfit the old bulletin building. But Mclean also had Mellor, Meigs, and Howe design a house for him in the late 20s. Ike Levy had George Howe design a building for him, a house for him on Schoolhouse Lane that no longer survives. It was knocked down. And then Paley had Ed Bolton, who was an important person in the drafting room for the PSFS building, to design a house for he and his wife, Goldie Paley, who was a sister of, I think it was Leon Levy's sister, if I'm not mistaken. No, yeah, something like that. So let's look at CAU. So I mentioned this is the first building along the Golden Mile. This is where the Roberts houses were. This is the Great Reservoir. This is the former golf club for the Philadelphia Country Club. And then this is the site of CAU. This will become the area for the Marriott. And then this is the area where Gulf had its regional headquarters and so on. And then this is the area for the Bala-Cynwyd Mall, where Raymond Loewy and others do the Lord and Taylor building. So here's the view of CAU from Monument Avenue in a photograph from about 1952, that 220-foot window wall very clearly shown. The building on its site, the expansion and having space for expansion is an important part of the building. Climactic control, sound isolation, you can see the air handler units up on the roof are an important part of the building. Going inside, we can see the production facilities, the kind of master control facilities for television here, office spaces related to production, but then the studios 1, 2, and 3 for television, but also radio here. You've got areas all on one level to have props and service areas in. Ease of access for these spaces, and that you have a clear separation for sound and other qualities between the office spaces. The administrative spaces are on the second floor. On the lower level, which is not shown in this plan, you have dressing and makeup. You also have the cafeteria. I don't think there were enough restaurants along City Avenue, so all the facilities offering office spaces had to have a cafeteria space. I don't know how long those spaces were maintained. Expansion was important, and these are not great images, but the building is here, but they imagined that they could add 3 future production facilities, storage facilities, and so on as needed. And I'm going to show how this example was present and at the cutting edge of what CBS was doing nationally and how this fits into that larger pattern. But this idea of a lobby where the public enters, and this idea of this facility being visible, right? Just the move from downtown Philadelphia to the suburbs suggests that this move of American culture to suburbanization is important. CAU was on the cutting edge of that, and that this would be something seen from a car at speed, right? And so this large lobby area that's visible and that the public could enter in is really important. The idea that you have, and you're making reports from the field, of course, that's happening in radio before World War II, but here you see the bulletin television van. This is the radio news, the television news van in its 1940s iteration. These were all standardized things that RCA and other companies who were actually producing the engineering were producing. It was being integrated into any television studio being built. firms like the Austin Company, knew how to do this. These are some of the most complicated building types to be done by any architect engineer involved in building in the United States, maybe only equivalent to performing arts spaces and theaters. But that public space, this great ramp in which you enter the building and that you arrive, and this is really a public entrance where you come up and you enter the building, and there's a lobby space that you arrive at. And this is where there's a public gathering space that then takes you into the Studio One, where there was a live audience involved. All the studios could provide for this, but this actually had a fixed station. But you can see in this wonderful glass corner, you're seeing the traffic as viewed from here. The Marriott is across the way. It's really a great, space thinking about the future of the city. This is an opening day, and of course the Levy brothers are attending. William Paley is attending the opening, Thornburg and others. And Paley is saying this is really the best we have of the studio, really being at the cutting edge. But that idea of visibility and seeing in, you can see that there's the TV, master control. You have the radio master control, the receptionist. That was really visible from that lobby space. We can also see how that's a connection to Studio One. And here you can see the public being able to view in where the transmission is heading out. And this is the view from the lobby space looking in, right? Of course, this is highly specialized technical glass, triple pane. That 220 foot window wall also, I think, is still intact. It's probably triple pane glass. It's cutting edge Libby Owens Ford. I think it's Libby Owens Ford, if I'm not mistaken. No, it's actually Pittsburgh plate glass, sorry. And Robert Montgomery Brown's father is the president of Pittsburgh plate glass. So knowing this technology and being able to bring it together in that magnificent window wall is really important. Here's the lobby for the administrative areas up on the second floor. This is Ann Tridick-Dickey, her work in choosing the furniture and the colors. Here's the president's office. This is Dick Thornburg's office. You can see walls in beige and blue-green. The carpet is beige with a brown fleck. You can see Aero Saarinen chairs, and the furniture is designed by Howe and Brown, which is interesting. Here's the conference room table, walls in beige, but also some medium blue fabric. But of course, now instead of a radio being at the center of that, you've got a television, and here's Dick Thornburg with the latest show and the team assembled around that conference table. But moving into the studios, and I'll finish in about 10 minutes or sooner, just to give you a sense of where I'm at. Here's Studio One. You can see there's a studio audience. There's a client's booth, right? So this is, like at a stadium, these are box seats, right? Where there's glass, there's no glass here, but you can hear the studio, the reaction of the audience. But the production control facility is up top, and you've got the glass overlooking the studio space. And here's what Studio One looks like with a fixed studio audience. You can see there's a lot going on. There's, in terms of stage sets and so on, you've got the cameras, lighting. There's a lot more going on here that needs to be managed in a television facility. Here's the view from the Studio One control room. The truss up top, which is what the Austin Company called the Telly truss, is a Vierendeel type truss, which allows a great flexibility in maneuvering any kind of utility that you want. Could be ductwork, could be electrical services, and so on. You needed that in a television production facility. So here's Studio Two. That did not have fixed seating, although it could have a studio audience. You could see there was a set of fixed or flexible sets that you could do. You could be filming a particular television show from, and the control room is up above. Here's the view of Studio 2 and on the set of Action in the Afternoon, which was one of the early productions of CAU. And the productions could be inside and out. So CAU used that large facility, their back set, their back lot for Action in the Afternoon. And so here you can see the Wild West coming to Lower Merion in the form of the set. So if you drove by City Avenue in 1952, 53, 54, you might have seen Action in the Afternoon as a live performance. Another one of the fun early productions was Candy Carnival, which was referring to the early sponsor, M&M Candy. It was later Contest Carnival when the sponsorship changed. But here's on the set, and the host is Gene Crane, while it was still the M&M sponsorship. And the live studio audience. So I think this was probably Studio 3. And some of these images are from Broadcast Pioneers of Philadelphia, the website, which is really a terrific site. And while it's really looking at the broadcast history, there's really a great story for architectural history is embedded within that, and heritage too. These are the dressing rooms on the lower level, and it actually shows Gene Crane and some of the other clowns that were part of the performance in that space. So here is CAU. It's opened in the middle of 1952. Throughout its construction and design, and after it was built, it was the topic of conversation in print media, within the broadcast community, within the architectural community, within the engineering community. This was a building that served as an incredibly important model for all broadcast studios being built from 1950, 51 onwards, including CBS's Television City. And so there's an important progressive architecture that looks at TV stations. CAU shows that on the cover. It's featured throughout that as how you're describing the important parts of a TV studio, and also broadcast news from 1953. There is a 26-page profile written by John Leach, the engineer, about all that went into this building that had to have an impact in future designs. But I want to specifically point out Architectural Forum did a 3-part series about new buildings for CBS. Television City kicked it off early in 1952, or in June, I think, of 1952. They did a focused issue on CAU in the middle in September 1952, and then they followed up with a full publication of Television City. And so let me just show you this. This was Luckman and Pereira out in Los Angeles. I'm not sure who, it was not Austin, but I'm not sure who was providing the engineering behind. Dick Thornburg had left Los Angeles, so this was entrusted to Frank Stanton and others to oversee. But we can see ultimately what was built, but we can see the idea that you would be greatly expanding this facility over time. That was embedded within CAU. Here's Frank Stanton and Van Valkenburg, who were the kind of executives in charge of the building. We can see Edward R. Murrow as part of a television program. This is actually a giant model showing the future of broadcasting and really building public interest in the building. Here's phase 1, which ultimately was, I think, the only phase they ever built of Television City. They were going to expand greatly. So like CAU on City Avenue, they never expanded beyond the initial build out, but they were both intended to be built out. Public participation was an important part of this. You can see this great glass wall involving the production facilities, here being the lobby, very elegant modern design within. The studio audiences within, but again, this is not Vierendeel Trust, this is a different kind of trust, but the section of CAU in Philadelphia and Television City are essentially the same. Service facilities at the lower level, studio facilities that allowed ease of movement of sets and so on, flexibility above for all the different needs that you had, okay? So CAU is really part of a context related to technology that's really on the cutting edge of TV production. And CAU in Philadelphia, in Bala Cynwyd, was producing shows that aired nationally, right? I mentioned a couple, there's many others. But I want to make the claim that CAU in its building on Chestnut Street and anticipate in integrating the best technology with cutting edge design, established a precedent among CBS that influenced all of their future designs for the next, or the corporate attitude for decades to come. That's because the Levys are a part of corporate hierarchy on the board, and so is William Paley. And so when William Paley and Frank Stanton commissioned Eero Saarinen to do the new headquarters building that's known as BlackRock in 1960, I would contend that's part of a pattern that was established on Chestnut Street in 1930-31, and that the building on City Avenue is an incredibly important part of it, and that TV and broadcasting is very much a part of our heritage in Philadelphia, and that the CAU building on City Avenue is really a nationally significant building and really should be understood as a great piece of architectural heritage for its association with broadcast, with its association with great design through George Howe, through Ann Triddick Dickey, through Austin Company, and many others. So I crammed a whole hell of a lot into that talk. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm happy to take questions.
Wow, Bill, thanks so much. I had really high expectations for this lecture, very, very high, but that was just extraordinary. Thanks for giving us such a full understanding of the context in which this building came to be. It's such a gem, and I think it's so underappreciated, and you've really brought life to it. So I do know that we have a number of questions. Let me just get to those. Let's see. Okay. Oh, all right. Let's just get right to the nugget. Can the speaker address the rather poor recent physical condition of the exterior of the building? What's going on?
I mean, I think like many buildings, I think it's inspiring that the building served its purpose for so long as a television studio, right? That's a testament to its strength. And that I think on the exterior, it had to be changed. The signage was changed. Obviously, it went from the bulletin television stations and CBS ultimately to an NBC station. So some of the signage had to be removed for obvious reasons, and corporate imagery changes over time. The technology changed, so there's a big air conditioner handler on the outside of the building that was added along Monument Avenue. That's not very sightly. There's also, they expanded facilities for outdoor broadcasting, right? We all are used to the weatherman standing outside. And so there's some garden terraces and other things that are part of that. But I think that window wall it's still intact. It's a steel window wall. And so while there might be a little rust there, I imagine it's in fairly good condition and can be easily restored. But the technology within, I don't know the state of it, and obviously it changed over time. At first, it was a black and white facility, and there's, again, a 20-something page article about when they added color, when they re-outfitted the technology within the CAU building for color television. And again, it led the way in an important way. It was all RCA equipment, I think. And so it was a major publication of RCA's broadcast, the RCA newsletter, which is really a magazine. I think I got the name of it wrong. So I think, in some ways, the building no longer serves the purposes of a major network broadcasting station. That doesn't mean that it's not useful and could not continue to be useful, right? Those studio spaces are very flexible. They were designed to be so. There's potential future use that's there. And the more we ask questions about what it could be used as and what's financially feasible in terms of ideas, I think is interesting and exciting. But it's a really important piece of heritage. And I would expect that any issue associated with the exterior of the window wall, the exterior character of the building, can be solved by the example of what they had to do at the United Nations Secretariat, the United Nations building in New York, the Lever House in New York. These are cutting edge mid-20th century corporate buildings. And so this is no longer rocket science. It's a question of will. It's also a question of, protecting the buildings. And there are ways that you can do that in the community of Lower Merion. And hopefully I've helped make the argument that it's something that ought to happen. But I don't think I would not blame the people who own the building for not maintaining the building. That's kind of something that happens all the time. And they want to divest themselves of that resource. So maybe it's not unexpected. It's really a question of putting it to future owners that, hey, this is really something special and that you could do something with this building. And I think you see people recognizing that this period of architecture is significant. It's got great character that is something that people want to engage with now. And so Television City out in Los Angeles and Columbia Square have both outlived their usefulness for contemporary broadcast television production, but they are being repurposed for other uses. Columbia Square is part of Viacom's West Coast headquarters, but they've incorporated the Lescaz designs into future use. The Television City, I know that things are developing now in terms of movie production and other types of facilities. But the LA Conservancy and other organizations are advocating. And I know that there's accounts of what's going on the web and in media and so on that you can look out for. But I try, I squeezed so much into this talk. I didn't really have time to be able to document for you. So it's possible. And I think the potential is there. And it's really just a question of finding someone who sees and values those qualities and decides it's worth investing in.
Thank you. That's a really eloquent argument for the preservation of this building and pointing to other buildings that are similar and in terms of their prior use. Having a roadmap of some sort is really important when we're thinking about the possible reuse of this building in Lower Merion. We have a lot of questions and so many that I'm not really able to organize them by subject. So I'm just going to actually go down.
Yeah, that's fine.
As they come. And some of these questions, other audience members have answered, it looks like, but I'm going to put them out there to you too, because you may have more to say about it. So there's a question, is the Chestnut Street building still standing?
Yeah, absolutely. It, and it's in pretty good shape. Old Navy is there. And for a long time, it was occupied by the Art Institute of Philadelphia. So I think in the 1980s, it was repurposed for the Art Institute. But before that, it was the home of CAU into the 40s. And then another station took it over for a while. Ultimately, it wound up being the home for WHYY for a long time before it moved to Independence Mall. So that's a building that's on the City Historical Register. There were, an attempt to repaint the facade to a different color palette that was rejected recently. So the City of Philadelphia is protecting that building and preserving it. So it's in good shape. And, I encourage you to drive down and take a look. Chestnut Street is kind of the great retail street of Philadelphia. So, didn't really touch on that or on Art Deco in Philadelphia or other contexts that you could add to looking at the Chestnut Street building, but it's in good shape.
Okay.
But of course, the interiors that CAU had were changed by CAU and probably lost somewhere along the way. So the Bezos murals, the furniture. I really don't know what happened to it, when it was changed and so on.
Okay, thank you. We have also a comment from somebody that there's a Sternfeld home on McClenahan Mill Road in Wynwood, which I'm assuming that most of the mid-century buffs from Lower Merion on this call know about, but that's exciting to know because I didn't know that. Let's see. Is the WCAU transmitting building still standing?
No, I think that that was torn down. I don't exactly know when. The antenna that I showed you was actually taken down during World War II and scrapped for metal. So I think they might have shifted their broadcasting. And actually, much of the talent within WCAU and all of the radio stations in the Philadelphia area was basically, taken into the Navy and into other, branches of the armed service. The CAU and other stations, they were really still at the cutting edge of broadcasting. So the engineers and people like Leon Levy really knew their trade. So they were very valuable to the armed services during World War II. So not a lot happened during the war years in terms of broadcasting, except for, people were getting news about the war from the radio, right? So I don't know, but I'm sure, on Broadcast Pioneers and other places, there's a lot of good focused stories that tell these different parts of the story. So I know that CAU created a new broadcasting facility over in Jersey. And so I think they built new not broadcasting, the transmitting facilities in other places. So I don't think the facility out in Westchester lasted very long.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question about the building on Chestnut Street. Has a portion of the light tower been removed? It seems shorter in later pictures.
Yeah, so the tower survived at its full height, I think, into the late 70s. And it just was structurally no longer sound. And so, and that's like having a sail on a sailing ship. So if the wind is blowing, potentially it has the potential to collapse. So I think, it needed to be taken down. It was like a movie theater, in that way it's based on some of the technology, the building technology used for signs and signage associated with, commercial buildings. These are not really designed to last long periods of time. They're built quickly, and with a budget in mind, and they're trying to do a lot. So behind that facade is a lot of things that need to be maintained, right? So yes, it was removed, but what's there, it's still lit, it's still functioning. I really would love to see it in its full height and full character as it was experienced when they first turned on the light. And again, I'd love it if anyone has a photograph of that. That'd be great to see.
Well, speaking of seeing it in real life, there's a question here that I've always been very curious about. What color were the original letters on the WCAU building in Bala Cynwyd?
I think the letters were like a chrome color, right? There was a neon light that was the CBS that was, perpendicular to City Avenue, but along the yellow brick facade, the beige brick facade, was the bulletin television. It said the bulletin I've forgotten the exact phrasing. Those were in chrome and very similar to the lettering that was on the bulletin building on at 30th Street.
And were they lit with a particular color?
I don't know if the neon, I can't tell because I think I only have black and white. It's not coming to mind, so I don't think I saw an image that had the color. The Modernism, it's a very different color palette from the, I think we could say the Chestnut Street building it's one of the high points of American Art Deco, inside and out. And color was an incredibly important part of the late 20s architecture. both Art Deco and also Beaux-Arts. Our art museum, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, is Greek, but it's colorful, right? So I think that's really important. But modern architecture, the color palette's different. The veneers, the wood is part of the Chestnut Street building, but that gives way to other materials and modern materials. So the glass wall, I think, is really a key part of it.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Here's another question. Is Thornburg related to the former Pennsylvania governor?
That's a really great question, and I think so, but I'm not sure. And I did, it's just not coming to me. Because I did the biographical research back in January, so, and I didn't go over that one aspect. But I'm not sure, in other words. But actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think not. I think it's just a coincidence of names.
Okay. Here's a question about both the WCAU building and their prior, guess their work in the city. Did CBS, did their proposed and failed color TV scheme, I'm sorry, it's the Bala Cynwyd one, influence the WCAU studio design?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
I think that, let's see, it's, did CBS's proposed and failed color TV scheme influence the studio design? So,
I mean, that may be too technical for, if I understand the question correctly, it may be too technical for me to answer. There were competing versions of color television in the 40s, and CBS had its version and NBC RCA had its version. RCA won out, although CBS had the early edge, but really RCA dominated. But I don't know enough about that side of the story to speak beyond that point. But it's pretty clear that CAU was outfitted with, RCA still, supplied the equipment for, a lot of the mechanics, if you will, within the building. So I think it had to do with, anyway, I'm struggling because I don't know how to answer it because it's not my field.
okay.
So forgive me.
Not a problem. Why was the ramp in the building? Was it for cameras and for equipment?
No, I think, you think about if you've been to the PSFS building on 12th and Market, getting from street level to the banking floor involves movement via escalators, right? There's really kind of this drama of shifting yourself from one level to another. And I think it's part of what George Howe and Robert Montgomery Brown brought to the design, is the sense of this progression via ramps. They didn't need it for the service side of things because they had ways of getting stuff in from the back lot, if you will. So whether they could drive cars up there, I just don't know. So I suspect it was part of the quality of movement through the building for the public. I think that window wall also is a very demanding thing, right? It's, you have to be very strict in your control of natural light within the studio spaces. So you don't have a lot of natural light within the first floor production facilities and office spaces. I'm not sure if you did on the second floor administrative. I can't tell from the information I have access to if there were windows on the balcony there. So I think it's part of that, the experience of the building from the public, the image of it as seen from a distance. And when the public came to the building, it gave them a different, interesting sort of experience in moving through the building to go to the, essentially from where you park to where you enter Studio One.
Okay. Oh, here's a question for you. Do you see the light tower of Norman Foster's Comcast Technology Center, which is the new home to WCAU Studios, as an homage to the original WCAU tower on Chestnut Street?
It sure seems fun to imagine. You know, I mean, and it's, you know, in a sense, there's a poetic beauty to the idea that, you know, these things come around, and you know, the architect of the first, you know, Comcast building is Bob Stern. You know, so we're not talking about the Foster one. You know, he's, you know, early on in his career in the 60s was a great admirer of George Howe, and still is, you know, and wrote a great, you know, wrote still one of the only books on George Howe. So that sense of the PSFS being an important building, and that you need to pay attention to Philadelphia architects is important. You know, Norman Foster is someone who greatly admired another great Philadelphia building, the Richards Medical Research Laboratories, and he came down and saw that as a student, you know, when he was spending time at Yale. So Philadelphia is certainly something that they were aware of. Whether they were aware of Sternfeld or not, I don't know, but I think it's quite beautiful that CAU was, you know, there was a trade between CBS and NBC, which I still don't really understand, where CAU was CBS for years and then it became NBC. That Comcast, you know, owning NBC Universal, that just seems, you know, it's interesting that, you know, the first purpose-built radio station in the country was CAU, and, you know, Comcast owns CAU now, I think, right? So,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to throw out the last question for you, and that's this: understanding what you know about the building and how it was designed, with flexible interior spaces. So there was the potential for different uses, different studio uses there, and then also with the idea that the building could be expanded, the footprint could be expanded, correct? Because you have that very, very large parking area. Do you see opportunities beyond just beyond just adaptive reuse for the building itself, but understanding that that area of City Avenue is now zoned for much higher density, more bulk and more height, for an addition to that building that could be sensitive and compatible with it, and so that, you know, you could expand the use and you know, the commercial use of profitability, making a more attractive development project.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where you have the intangible value of the building, which connects to, in profound ways, and I think really compelling ways, to American culture, and especially of the 20th century. So, you know, that's in the shape of the building and in its layout. And it was, you know, meant to be very flexible. You know, it got me thinking of spaces, you know, like gallery spaces, like the, you know, I mean, in some ways, the ICA here in Philadelphia is very similar in its, you know, in its, if you think about the plan of the two buildings as a diagram, they're almost identical. And there's ramp spaces in, you know, ICA. I'm not sure Philadelphia needs another, you know, art museum or cultural institution, but, you know, those big galleries, you know, those big, you know, I think it's 40, you know, 60 by 80 or 100 studio spaces are, you know, you can do a lot with. The building is, you know, has a great control of sound, right? So that there's potentially other, you know, spaces that can be incorporated there. I just, you know, I spend all my time around the thinking and imagination of architects, and I live in that world, that I have great faith that, you know, you get a visionary client and you get a good architect together, they can come up with something, you know, that is, you know, embracing of the heritage that there is, there recognizes that, you know, that change is inevitable, and, you know, but there are features and character defining elements of the building that contribute to its significance and that maybe one doesn't want to lose. But, you know, inevitably, it seems that serving as a TV production facility, at least for, you know, a national television network, is maybe no longer, you know, feasible. but are there other purposes? So I mean, in that way, there were visionary clients involved in making the building. There were visionary architects involved in designing it, and engineers and others, and that it's a question of inspiring, that you got to do something. And I think for Lower Merion, this may be one of the most significant buildings you've got, right? And if you try to gauge buildings at the level of their impact on the national scene, what else have you got that, at least in contemporary experience, that lived experience of people, today, that they can really, hey, I know something about that, it's right there, and for the Golden Mile, for the Golden Strip there, it's almost the only intact building that, only building, it's the earliest, one of the earliest, and it's still intact, right? We don't know what's going to happen to Lord and Taylor. Many of the buildings there that define that period are gone or are altered beyond recognition. This is what you've got, right? So I think it's interesting to recognize that, tax base and tax revenue is important, but the community of Lower Merion has a choice. And, I think these types of buildings that are not just about a one way in, this is not just about being a work by George Howe. I think we all recognize that there's multiple layers to heritage, and, the fact that there's an important woman involved as a designer, I think contributes to the significance of the building, that, it's part of one of the, the growth of media in this country, that it contributes to, the evolution of technology and broadcasting and, so on, that, and it's an invisible location. This is a place where a lot of people pass by, it's got that visibility. So, I think it's got great potential there.
So perfectly stated. The Conservancy is 100% with you on that. I'm sure that there are many others on this call who are. So that was our last question, but we do have a few comments. And the one that really stands out is, have you thought about writing a book? And
well, I mean, in talking about this with David Brownlee and with Sandy Eisenstadt and some others, there's definitely some really interesting questions in the application of material and the choices of material and structures and other things. And it's actually a way to explore, the history of broadcast and the impact of broadcast. And it's actually really interesting that it's so kind of the timeline, the chronology is actually quite tight, right? CAU was opened on Boxing Day, 1932, and CAU was opened, 20 years later, right? The City Avenue building. And that's also an incredible transition in American modernism and in the history of Philadelphia architecture, So I think it's really nice to find ways that you can transect through larger narratives and find how it operates at the local level, but still resonates at a national level. And so there's potential there. So maybe I'm not going to commit, but we had intended here at the Architectural Archives in the Kreutz Gallery to do an exhibition about what we were calling 9 to 5 Philadelphia's post-war workspaces. And the WCAU building and then the ABC station across the way were two buildings that were part of that story. We didn't do that exhibit because it was supposed to open right as COVID hit. And so I've got a checklist, and we never put the show up on the wall, and in a way I don't think we'll ever be able to do it, based on the circumstances of COVID. So I'm sorry that didn't happen. But what was really exciting was to cut through Philadelphia modernism, looking at technology, looking at the drug companies, what they were doing, looking at just corporate modernism within the Philadelphia region, both downtown and out, and just the trajectories. There's some great architecture out there. Much of it is gone because Philadelphia was such a powerhouse in the first half of the 20th century, and that all was changing. And so while you find accounts of, from the 40s, envisioning that Philadelphia will be the center of computing technology, well, we know that didn't happen. And yet, UNIVAC and Unisys still have facilities in Bluebell, I think, or until recently did. The GE Space Technology Center is still there. And much of the technology that goes into space satellites and other things was tested there, so that there's a great heritage there. So, the weather satellites and things like that. So, it's interesting to see that, maybe you could call it an afterglow. And maybe that's coming back. Maybe the having Comcast and other, corporations like that, gives potential that Philadelphia is a great place and there's a great architectural heritage there. And, I hope that in the future, these buildings from the past are still a vital part of the future. I think that's what we all engage with. Not everything's going to be saved, but I think there's a few we should fight for. So anyway, so that transect through our region's modernism and just trying to find things that I don't know about, right? And that have not been privileged by being, major architects and major periodicals. We're all, we all, I mean, I do certainly, and I think many of you would agree, we all want to be more embracing of stories that have not been accounted for in heritage up until this point. The role of women in design has been something that's been looked at more intensively, but it's still, architecture is, still, somewhat of a male dominated field, but I think that's actually changed in the past decade. But the role of African Americans and other people in the heritage, and that we've just not paid attention to. And so I'm enjoying finding ways to find the various different participants that are involved in making things of consequence. And you dig deeper into complicated projects like the 2 CAU buildings, you start to find these individuals, and you start to find stories that are really compelling, that show the complexity of things and show the impact that individuals have in shaping, what I'll call great art, in terms of these 2 buildings and other buildings in the area. So,
yeah. Well, I feel so privileged to have been in the audience tonight to hear you. This was a story, I think, this was an untold story, and for it to, sort of be published in the way that you've done it tonight is such a service to the community. So thank you so much, Bill. I know you spent an extraordinary amount of time putting this together, and the Conservancy is just grateful. Since this is recorded, I think we can send it to everyone on who signed up for it. So you can watch it again, share it with people who haven't seen it. I know I'll be sharing it far and wide. So thank you again, Bill, and thank you very much to St. Joe's for hosting the Zoom call, and also to Archer and Buchanan for your generous support for tonight's lecture. So good night, everybody, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Bill.